since COVID and what it actually means to be in a building that's good for your mental health and well-being. So things like organic forms and curves and colour and light and yeah, lots of nature. So just a bit about my background. So we started off the year by imagining something that we were interested in. So for me, I asked an AI to imagine a large structure promoting wellness and relaxation. And I found it quite interesting because there are a lot of cross to use is ChatGPT, and that helps a lot with regulations of AI applications like ChatGPT, Midjourney, DALL-E, imaging AIs, and get these results that are actually based off scientific evidence or what we believe to be legitimate instead of just a pretty image. It was the original Midjourney image, and I kind of, like we saw in the previous slide, traced over it, got to know the geometry and the curves. But this kind of shows the juxtaposition between where can AI not help between tinted materials, curved stained glass, and then again the juxtaposition between manual, like making the models that you do in university, and the AI.
Again, we're going to get another really wide, usually when you go to these AI conferences, it's all very technical. We're trying to give a really broad view of the discourse, so I'm really excited about this one again.
I'm Keir, I'm a director at Morrison Company. We're a London-based architecture practice, and I'm not from the parametric tradition, but I am fascinated with the emergence of generative AI. We'll start with, I want you to picture a rabbit in the middle of the road, and there's some headlights and a fast car coming towards it. What do we think the rabbit is going to do? Do we think it will survive? I'm optimistic for the rabbit, okay? Rabbit, fast, it's nimble. Rabbit could crouch down, get between the wheels, it could get out of the way, it's got a good chance. How do you think this self-driving car? The car is generative AI, and the driver of the car is venture capital, the artisans, the specialists. They deal with the highly bespoke, and they deal with Peter Zumthor, using quite analog methods, handmade, craft-led, and on this side, Zaha Hadid, a digital culture, with machined technology and a sort of tech-savvy approach to design. What the market wants is standardization. A generative AI product probably isn't going to be a big enough thing in the UK on its own all the time, like sense of place. And they like to make funny cardboard models. And look, the MVP is ready. So that market share just goes straight to the client side, essentially. So anyone can do it. And a pretty sophisticated rendering. Probably stages 0 to 2. I think it's hard to point at any part of the plan and work and not see an opportunity for huge innovation and change. Besides, sorry, what can we do about it? Let's think about the rabbit. So I'm seeing 3 responses. There's the, I've tried ChatGPT, it didn't write an article as well as I could write it, therefore it's all just hype. Hear that one a lot. There's the kind of, I'm scared, I don't know what to do, keep calm and carry on, just sort of fingers in the ears. And then there's probably the people in this room, and the people in this room are the early adopters, the kind of, we see a brighter future and we're enthusiastic, and I want to get control of this thing. So if we could get ourselves organised, we might be able to pool our data. Final thought, which is a sort of, I've stolen this from Scott and Craft, is valued more highly by the market than mass market and abundance. So that talks about, we need to think about our value, about what we can produce that's scarce and valuable versus what is abundant and cheap and low value. What do people want versus what do they need?
You will know Neil Leach. I think we're in for a treat. He's one of the most renowned architectural AI figures in the world. I think Neil hopefully will give us some optimistic news to end with. Wink, wink.
Thank you, Keir. You set me up for this. Actually, it's not going to be optimistic. So I don't want to be a party pooper, but there are kind of 2 groups when I talk about the dystopian side of things. One, the kind of Blade Runner people who love hearing about dystopia, right? And the other ones who kind of say, well, that's a bit nasty. The Copernican revolution, for reasons that have become clearer very recently. I think as architects, I've been working on AI for years, much better than anybody imagined, and certainly that I imagined. So on the one hand, we had this letter by Elon Musk asking for everyone to call a halt, which sounds a bit unrealistic. It's a bit like asking the leaders in the London Marathon to slow down a bit, because they're not going to, because the rest of the field will catch up. And then we got this guy, Geoffrey Hinton, described here as the godfather of AI. He's not the godfather of AI, he's the godfather of deep learning, who quits Google and is warning us about all sorts of things. Geoffrey Hinton, for those who don't know, Bowden. Curiously, there are a lot of Brits here, right? She's down at the University of Sussex. We need to make computers be conscious, like the mind, and I actually don't think we do. My own particular line is that provided the machine does what you want it to do, if your toaster makes toast, good toast, it doesn't need to be sentient or conscious. But that is the crucial difference between the two neural networks, the left-hand side, the one of the mind, of the brain, and then the artificial neural network on the right-hand side. They both use the same terminology, neurons and synapses and so on and so on. I won't go into this now. But the crucial difference is that a neural network, an artificial neural network, it doesn't think. It doesn't the important sort of issue that we need to sort of be aware of. The term artificial intelligence was actually coined back in '56 by this group of young individuals. It's in the top there. Then 50 years later, in 2006, they got back together again, the survivors, morphizing these terms. There are a lot of terms that have been used, deep learning, creativity, intelligence, and applied to the context. I think it's more in the domain of information processing, and it's very, very effective at information processing. So deep learning is the revolution that actually began to happen, so maybe I'll go to the period, as it were. And maybe just to illustrate this, to kind of get a sense of what's been happening, this is 1997, Garry Kasparov being beaten by Deep Blue, IBM's computer, at chess, and nobody thought that he was going to lose, right? One of the greatest chess players of all time, but he lost. And he makes this comment, we just have to understand that everything that we know how to do, machines will eventually do better than us. I think the key to 16, the next challenge was AlphaGo that was I won't go into this, but there were a number of moves here that would just astonish people. At first they thought they were computer mistakes, they were glitches and so on, and then 100 moves later they suddenly realized, holy shit, this thing can think 100 moves ahead. And the company said, well, he says AlphaGo showed us moves humans may have thought are creative were actually conventional. I think I'd go beyond that to say it was doing things that we just were on beyond our spectrum. We had no clue what was going on. Those who have got dogs or cats, or particularly dogs, they have dogs have a range of smell and hearing beyond humans, and you'd have to input thousands and thousands of images. You have to know about the computation and all these things, and it was extremely difficult. But in the end, we came up with an image. I'll cut it short. That was the image we put on the front cover of my first book. And then in 2001, this was probably the state of the art. It was the best we had, as it were. And it's kind of, if you look at it closely, there are glitches everywhere. It's not perfect and so on. But this was what we had, and that was what we put on the front cover of the age. They don't copy, they search and synthesize. So you get this kind of prompt here, an astronaut on a horse, doing by putting these prompts in. This is my work, but it could be anyone's. And of course, it comes up with a range of things we would never have imagined, which are kind of astonishing. And I think a lot. This is David Alf, who, I mean, amazing. And then people like I'm blanking on his name now. The Spanish architect who teaches in Singapore, who uses anyway. I think that this obsession with images actually is going nowhere. It's a limitation of the way. I'd also say that there are these practical, these are the first you'll on a single platform. You won't go from Maya to Rhino to BIM. You'll go from data to fabrication, and it'll be complete. We thought that it was the factory floor that was, most at risk of automation. The robots would tell you this is a Tesla factory, right? And nobody inside, right? So I actually, I wrote this thing, it was a bit vanilla. It came out with this kind of bland statement. I said, come on, ChatGPT, give me something more spicy than that. So we've got a slightly spiced up version, but basically you can see basically what it's saying, right? One from people who used AI said, yeah, of course, what's new about this? And other people who never used AI, he kind of came up with his most pompous responses. There was one guy who said, there's not an AI on the market that could possibly match my sheer ingenuity and creativity. Well, he's going to be the first to go, right? So you will ever know. I don't know whether I'd use the word smart, but it's going to be way more efficient, and it's going to be able to do things way beyond the spectrum that we're capable of. So what I would recommend you, look at that machine. It can't even do these kind of things. Who cares? I think say, who cares? We need to go and adopt a different sort of stance and recognize that 18. And I was getting a little bit terrified by it. I felt compromised, like Elon Musk, who's kind of using it the whole time for Tesla, for SpaceX, for Neuralink, and so on. And at the same time, telling it's going to destroy civilization. And I felt like that, so I spoke to my publisher in Bloomsbury, there, right next to the AA, and I said, can I break it up into 2 different books? One with a white cover, like an angel, about the positive side of AI, and one with a black cover, right? Like the devil, with about the dark side of AI. So the right is the one that's going to be called The Death of the Architect, the Demise of the Architecture Profession. We could actually kind of go further under, because I totally believe that most of what we can do can be automated. I'll leave it at that, but I've got a few positive things to say afterwards. But
Wow. Okay, and use ChatGPT. Question I've asked these guys to think about, and that question is broad and ambiguous, because we'll get great answers from that. And that question is, how will architecture change as a result of all this stuff? But we'll get to that one at the end. I want to start with Tim. And this is to do with the concept of true image weight, which we've discussed. And what I mean by true image weight, for those who have used the software and who might not, and I'll simplify in the sense of, like, if you feed, and in the architectural sense, let's say, if you feed a building facade, an existing building facade to Midjourney, for example, and you ask it to iterate onto that image source reference, it will skew the image, and that's one of the, I suppose, the shortfalls of Midjourney. But if you feed it into Stable Diffusion, which we've experimented with, the control parameters with that, it can maintain the exact facade you give it and iterate onto that. And that seems to be a key challenge we're trying to work with in practice, and everyone's trying to kind of get there. And Neil showed some incredible examples at the forefront of research there. But I want to ask you, Tim, because your work has been so obsessed with doing that. Why are you so obsessed with doing that? And kind of, what does that mean? Are we trying to, in many ways it makes me think, are we trying to make our roles obsolete? Where are we heading with this controlling the image business?
So I think this is probably a bit antithetical to what Neil has been telling us.
Good.
There is such a fear we have, with how much we will lose control once the AI surpasses us. And I guess it's probably partially a humble human reaction to try to obtain control within such a chaotic system that we can efficiently sort of co-pilot and co-create alongside of AI. So in that sort of struggle is kind of like allowing us to partake in the ideation alongside of the AI, so that there is not people that are going against the AI art community would have said that we don't have any ownership in AI. The things that are created are algorithms, and you're just typing a bunch of text. And that's why also what I teach in the courses regarding Midjourney is I try to showcase how every single minuscule action you take with controlling the algorithm is having an effect. And that effect is something that you have to judge. And when you judge, it's kind of like when a photographer takes a look at a bunch of photos, or even when a museum curator, like what you've done yourself with the exhibition here, is that you've been given all these things, but you're making artistic human decisions in how to bring that and showcase that. So it's a very human endeavor to try to initiate the artistic side of this.
It reminds me of the whole the mission we have to control it as opposed to it controlling us. And I also am fascinated by one of the things you've said in the past, which is machine ideation and machine fabrication and human ideation. Or let's say it in the order: human ideation, creating the idea, and then machine fabrication. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that's changed?
The post-industrial revolution era was mostly, still human ideation followed by machine fabrication. We're replacing, like what Neil has said, all the factory workers and all that. But we always hold ourselves as the ideators, if you will, the creators. that will be the last to be replaced. But now with this whole idea of machines actually generating new concepts and ideas, such as the last project I showcased where I collaborated with the sculptor. He is the one that is doing handicraft, fabrication. So he incorporated human artistry on the fabrication side, allowing machine to do the ideation while curated by me in the middle. So that particular project, I wanted to showcase how this narrative can be reversed, and it's the first time in human history that it is really reversing as such. Like before that, we didn't really have such a ideator machine prior to that. Maybe Neil can say something different.
I mean, I think there's a mistake that there was a study done by two scholars in Oxford comparing humans with AI and saying, well, they made a list, like 700 different professions. And they said architects were about 70, so we were actually doing okay. We were going to not be replaced, but the mistake they made was assuming it was a one-for-one replacement. But actually, really what's happening is this tool has become a kind of prosthesis to the human imagination. You'll be able to ideate, come up with way more possibilities than you could do before. And really the comparison that should be made is between a human using AI and a human not using AI. And one person using AI can achieve as much as 5 people not using AI. I don't know if that's correct, I don't know when it's going to be correct, if it's going to be correct, but the point is that is the comparison to be made. So you could argue that 80% of architects could go out of job because of that.
Before you debate too much, I want to ask you the question, because this is exactly what I was going to ask you, Neil, and it's perhaps the new thing when you the generative architect. Who is the generative architect? That title of, we as you mentioned, an architect who has at their disposal the traditional analog tools that we've already used and the digital tools can only achieve so much. What does an architect who has fluency and access to the best AI tools, what are they capable of achieving, and how does that change?
Well, I had a discussion with Autodesk about this a few weeks ago. And I think what you've got to see is, they were saying, well, how do you get a client when you're all using the same AI? I think you've got to change what we are as architects, because what you can become, you can break down all these siloed barriers. I mean, I can do fashion design, you can do fashion design, you can all do that. Fashion design, digital architecture. But we can also potentially become developers. And if you think about what AI does, it's in a sense kind of offering checks and things, like spell checks and things. It could guide us through. ChatGPT could be telling us what to do. It could be checking, making sure we're not making mistakes. We could really seize the initiative and take that role. At the moment, we are so low down the pecking order, being paid so little and developing getting so much. I think that would be the way I'd say that you could really, to be disruptive.
That's integrate. And the question is for Chantal. And Chantal, you showed some incredible examples of hybridity, but I think you are also challenging what it is to do analog work in a sense. And the example that came to my mind is when you were saying when you put so much effort into a prompt, and I've been there, spending hours and hours and hours and hours refining this mid-journey prompt, and you get to a point where there's no machine agency here. This is all me. This has been some. I wonder, how do you see the new analog in a way? What makes a process hybrid? Does it have to be something that involves physical hand kind of work, or can it be a pure AI thing?
The thing is, even without including your own work or a reference or in any other way, like into machine learning or AI or mid-journey, there's also, they might have other opinions about it, but when you start to prompt or write something, it's coming out from your own imagination. I always tell my students, whenever they have doubts that it's actually their work or not, even they're using their own words, I try to make a comparison with, for example, Jackson Pollock paintings. I mean, the way he does his artwork is just the way he expresses himself. He just paints as he feels. So in the same way, you're doing the same process, but instead of painting, you're using words, your own words. So I always try to, I don't want to defend it to the extreme about AI. I think there's a lot of, also, for now, there's a lot of negative side, but this part of you where you're using your own words, your own imagination, is also increasing your creativity to perceive space, and even with words that were not, you wouldn't think about it if you were using a 3D modeling tool like we are right now, like in classical, as a classical architect, you wouldn't if you want to go to CAD or even sketch by hand. There's always certain limitations to what you can do, or there's constraints being an architect. There's a lot of things that you need to take into consideration. This tool, it just unlocks a lot of, there's no boundaries anymore in certain way.
And reaching. No, I think there's a danger there, because what have we done in the past? We've taken words from the client and we've interpreted and come up with images. What does Midjourney do? I mean, basically it does that. So that puts us more at threat.
So do you agree that using AI is true to our agency, or is it, as soon as you start using AI tools, I know there's a broad range of them, does that take away from your agency in any way?
I think you're always working within certain constraints. You can't do everything, frankly, with these prompts. So there's a term called affordance that J.J. Gibson talks about. Certain tools kind of allow you to do certain things, and they don't. And you end up, you don't have that full agency because you give up on certain things. Some things work and some things don't. And you go down certain rabbit holes because of that.
What I kind of throw in the mix of that is something I've talked about, which is the ideation or mind to mark making, right? And the idea there is like, if the idea is in your head, the shortest distance for that, before Neuralink and before we start using that, the shortest distance from your idea in your mind to the piece of paper, say, is through your hand. Now, once you take that idea and transfer it through other mediums like a mouse, and then becomes interpreted by Rhino, for example, you could argue that on that journey, that idea has been interpreted, changed, skewed, and therefore there's a level of agency lost. I think what we're trying to say here is that we don't necessarily believe that agency is lost just by using a digital or a technological tool. Is that what you'd say, Chantal?
Yes, I think my only argument with defending this kind of process is the data set that's being used, because when we are using Midjourney or any other platform, there's no control from our side into what's been included into this library, basically. We know to a certain extent that they're using all the database existing and the web and all that, so there's also all sorts of things. So this is my only argument sometimes, that I feel like maybe I shouldn't defend it that much, but at the same time, like, just your own nature, I'm quite explorative.
But I've seen amazing work that you've done, and I love people who are trying to push this boundary of thinking what hybridity is in this new age. And one example I loved of yours was where you took a photo of your model, your art, your painting,
yeah,
and you were using that as an image source reference to then transform that art piece into fixture design and into interior design. And it does very much feel like that's your work.
Yeah. For example, like, it gives more control in a way. I don't know to what extent. Like, it's a bit more psychological in this side, but it is quite a control of things, of how you want your own work interpreted as a library itself. So you're using your own data set in this case. So that's certain amount of control over it. But yeah, like, the opportunities of how to use that is really vast, and that's the good thing about how to use Midjourney or any other.
And I see tutors here and professors who have been exposed to the AI workflows. And there's something obviously quite interesting with regards to what happens when they graduate and they bring all the stuff they've been experimenting with into the workforce and into the public discourse. Because right now, you're in your silos and your studios, Kat, working up and experimenting with AI. I'd love to ask you, like, what is it like being a student who's suddenly got access to AI technology in your studio? What happened? What was your experience?
It's exciting, but it can be overwhelming because you're kind of bombarded with a lot of different styles. So for me, I found that it actually changed my taste in architecture. And an example of that is, I think it was Midjourney version 3 or 4, when that came out. It became very overtrained in these white vaulted parametric structures. Like, we were seeing it everywhere, and any image you generated, it would have some kind of white vaulted, maybe concrete texture. And I liked parametric art. I'm not sure if I should be saying this, but it kind of put me off in a way, because too much of anything, it can be bad. So I was finding myself searching for things that were more seamless, more fluid. And yeah, I never expected it to switch my opinion on what my preferred style of architecture is, but it did that.
Something really fascinating, actually, which is the data sets that were being fed into the Midjourney app. It shows us, right, like, the very first people exploring Midjourney were just putting in parametric inputs because they love that shit, and that's what we were getting. And that, sorry, Zaha. That's what we were getting. you know, you're right, I remember that. V3, V2, everything you were getting was these weird parametric kind of fabric everywhere, oh my god. But now, version 5.1, Raw, Nigel, all these new engines we've got now with Midjourney, we can explore all the styles. So it's an interesting thing you pointed to with regards to the time it takes for these data sets to become diversified. Have you felt any obstacles and pushback from tutors?
Yes.
What are they worried about?
I think certain parts of strengths and weaknesses that you didn't know you had. So I think, if I'm being self-critical, technicality is not my strong point. Imagination is. So I found it really easy to create images that I found incredible and differed from the regular style that Midjourney's algorithm started becoming trained in. But then to create that into a physical product, I struggled with. However, you know, if you can create a team, say in a firm, for example, of very diverse skill sets, and maybe we can start categorizing what skill sets are required in order to create a successful project. So you need imagination, you need somebody who's good with technicalities, and I think it's going to change the dynamic, well, it already is, but it's, going to continue to change the dynamic of firms even more, because the requirements, maybe even things on CVs, strengths and weaknesses, it's kind of juggling everything up at once.
The idea of straight latter stage work in that sense, in the built form, I think you pointed to that industry-wide scale. As someone who is working in practice and also literally hitting that obstacle, which is how is AI even useful for latter stage work. The Reba stages, I really want to ask you, I love that you pulled that up. Your presentation was funny, man, I love it. The badger. The stages, I have maybe a very difficult question for you.
Okay.
If you can answer it off the bat, I'd be very impressed. We are seeing, so the tools we mentioned, Midjourney, these diffusion models, very useful for early stage concept design, pre-concept design especially. We see Veras, you showed us Veras. Veras is incredible. Still a diffusion model, but plugs in directly to your 3D software.
Yeah.
Hypar is also another example of that, which actually is text to model. So you can say, create a core of a building and with 8 floors and put in structural columns at this grid, and it will do it. I want to ask you, like, we're seeing these tools now start to bridge the gap between latter stage and early stage. And no doubt, I think you'd agree that we will have the full scope of tools to use from stage 0 to stage 7.
Mm-hmm.
1, do you agree? And 2, how will the Reba stages evolve? And here's the final bonus one. How will they be allowed to evolve, given Reba?
Okay, there's a lot there. Yeah, it's interesting. Everyone talked about Midjourney, and I kind of came at it from the more how do you actually make buildings sort of perspective. And I think Midjourney is interesting. I was actually slightly concerned by the idea of convergence to like one idea that the algorithm could create. And I was playing with it last night with my wife, and it was, you know, when you get the grid of 4, we kept agreeing on the one that was the best one to follow. So there's an interesting sense that there was an aesthetic consensus between us, like obviously that one, okay, and obviously that one. You go 20 layers deep and suddenly you've got something kind of amazing. But it's slightly addictive, and it's like a slot machine. You just kind of keep putting pennies in, pounds, or I don't know. I actually find that quite worrying, and I'm very enamored with the things I see from it. But I think we should be self-reflective about how much we're enjoying what we see. It's almost like a kind of alluring reflection, like, wow, I'm such a genius. It's kind of worrying to me. So yeah, I'm probably more interested in okay, how can AI help me do my job better?
Yeah.
Or be more productive, or maybe more competitive from the like literally tools-based stuff. And I guess I would just say anything that feels mechanical and feels like, oh, it's a bit of a bore, probably is a target
To get automated.
Yeah. So anything where you can express it as a kind of rule set of parameters and easily describe it. I think there's a lot of regurgitation currently done. I do different kinds of buildings, but each time there's often something that comes up that was being reused from another project, and you sort of think, well, you gave me that same advice on the last project. Structural engineering.
Well, you know what? Right. But I wonder why the automation came for early stage kind of tools.
That's surprising, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because the boring stuff you're talking about, maybe most of us would agree, is the latter stage work, drawing packages, or the automated things that could really be automated better. Maybe they're just taking time because it's going to be a big change.
We've been talking about this as maybe Revit is kind of like Betamax. Right? It's like, it's like pure tech, but actually it creates it's quite a boring thing to use, and create packages where it's like, oh, it's really drudgery. And actually, if you could instruct it with an LLM, like it's almost like if you could drive it with your intelligence rather than like clicking a mouse for millions of hours, that might be way more enjoyable.
It's bound to happen, right?
Yeah.
Just briefly, I mean, I think that the RIBA are on the way out, okay? So first of all, okay, so Wan Yu, she's one of my doctoral candidates, and she shows me things I can't show to you, and I can't talk about them, okay? Because they're all kind of, anyway, whatever. But they've already been asked to use their AI to evaluate competitions. And if you can evaluate competitions, you can enter competitions, and they've entered competitions, they've beaten firms like MVRDB and so on. So it's already kind of happening, we know what's going to come out. But then you think through the logic of that, If you've got something that is able to kind of conform to all the conditions of planning control, whatever it is, all those constraints, the cost constraints, the financial, the structural constraints, you've got something that actually, you don't need to put in a planning permission. You need to go and say, I'm an architect, look at this. You just send in your thing. You send in your proposal, at least it's evaluated as either right or wrong. In fact, actually, if the software works correctly, it doesn't even have to be evaluated. It's already working. I don't think we need to be called architects. I think the term architect is going to go out the window very, very soon. In the RIBA report that they kept very quiet about, that came up in 2013, they put it up there, they withdrew it. They basically came up with a kind of comment that actually the term architect, is pretty obsolete. But we're doing all these different things, industrial design and so on and so on and so on. Meanwhile, what we get from the RIBA, there was this absurd situation in 2012. Was it the RIBA? Was it the ARBA? I forget now. And they were arguing that Renzo Piano couldn't be called an architect in the UK because he wasn't trained in the UK. You're stuck in this absurdity. In the States, the AIA is even worse, right? You're qualified to operate in one particular state, but not another state. Look at Zaha's office, it's operating internationally. You're in a situation where I think these things, they're not defending architects. We're still not designing many buildings. What are they doing exactly? And I think they're going to be on the way out. And when we've got bots in there, bots are not going to join the RIBA. I think that we're going to see a wholesale difference in that. I don't think licensing is going to exist for much longer. And I think all those organisations are probably going to collapse.
I wish you were at the I wish Education and Practice conference that we were held, because we could have used a bit of this.
Well, can I just say one thing? I spoke to the AIA 3 weeks ago. I was expecting them to have this kind of complete resistance to everything I was saying. There's 60 top firms in the States. So if you like, it was ACOM and BIG and God knows what, Gensler and so on. They actually agreed. I saw them nodding, and they're smart. Those guys.
Well, from a Genslerite myself,
right.
we embrace the multidisciplinary potential of what architects can do. And hence you have product design, furniture design, brand design, graphic design. I think their size allows and facilitates for that. But I really love what you're saying about that we are going to head into this really multidisciplinary future. The idea that an architect could become a developer was a dream we had, recently. But now you're right, we really could do that if we leverage these technologies. I want to open up to everyone. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand.